From Russia with Love is now 60 years old, and if ever a film could be said to have stood the test of time, the second Bond film is it. In part 3, we chat about Natalia and the Allies. We'll move on to Tatiana because for some reason she's never really in the conversation as one of the best Bond girls. Yet quite a big character in the film. She's more complex, I think, than people give her credit for, because you don't know what's going on in her head when she's hired. You don't know what's going on in the head. Is she really in love with Bond? We never really find out.
Tatiana's beautiful. I mean, Hila Bianchi was just on top of her game in that film, and it's interesting because all the future screen tests that, of course, have been conducted, they always go back to that scene. And I think that scene is largely in part of its success, not just down to Connery, but down to her as well, because you genuinely feel there's a connection, there's a magnetism between the two of them. And although it's a setup, and he doesn't realise he's being filmed, you can almost feel that sexual chemistry between the two of them. And that carries on throughout the film. Is she in love with him? Who knows? Maybe, potentially. I think she certainly starts to fall for him, as most Bond girls do as the film progresses. But as we know at the beginning, I think it's all part of that rouse to get Bond on the mission and out to where he needs to be. What's interesting as well is, going back to the end scene, obviously, with the tussle, it's the first of 2 Connery appearances whereby the Bond girl actually kills the main villain. The next one is Thunderball. And that certainly set the standard. But those 2 scenes are actually quite mirrored if you look at it, look at them side by side. But the interesting thing about that scene is, before she kills Klebb, she actually is tussling in her own mind who to kill.
Yes,
because the gun is going across. She doesn't genuinely know who to kill because she is committed to her cause, but she also, by this point, I feel at least, has a sense of affection for Bond, at the very least. And that is a very interesting dynamic, but she makes the right choice, ultimately. Can you imagine if she'd killed Bond instead of Klebb?
Does she know then, ever, that actually her boss isn't working for her country? When does she find out that he's actually Spectre? Because if she knew it was Spectre, then of course, why would her?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, thought about that now, don't I?
I mean, Bond knows, but does she know? Is it entirely clear? Who knows? But I think she's a great Bond girl. I really do. I mean, of course, she will never be as iconic as Ursula Andress. I mean, she is the iconic and archetypal Bond girl. But I think she was the perfect follow-on from the likes of Ursula Andress. So I think she's great. I think she's absolutely stunning. And that scene in the hotel room is still one of the most iconic.
Very sexual film, isn't it, in many ways? There's that thread running through it. And that one is, what an unusual scene. Very difficult to film. If you think about what's going on, like, they're basically performing, aren't they? Both of them know that this isn't real, but they're quite happy to do it. They're talking quite dirty. I mean, it's children watching this film. The innuendos.
So you're Tatiana Romanova?
My friends call me Tanya.
Mine call me James Bond. Well, now that we've been properly introduced.
Careful. Guns upset me.
I'm sorry. I'm a bit upset myself.
You look just like your photograph.
You're one of the most beautiful girls I've ever seen.
Thank you. But I think my mouth is too big.
No, it's the right size. For me, that is.
Then you get Klebb watching it behind the glass, having a cigarette, and it's to children again. You don't really think much of it, but thinking back, it's very loaded sexual scene.
Yeah, it is, and it's this unusual thing about this ploy that's been set up, and Bond and Tatiana are both pawns in this game. Bond is more aware of his role in that, but she's still aware that she is doing something, but she doesn't actually know the genuine reasons for it. It's quite strange the way that they come together, and then they're a sort of couple, either ostensibly or really throughout most of the film. I think she's a really interesting character. I think, as Kieran says, succeeding Ursula Andress and, coming out of the water and all that was very difficult. But the way they do that is by not sort of really competing with that. She's completely different. Tatiana's an absolute key player throughout this film. Daniela Bianchi has that air of sexuality, sensuality, but also a little bit of naivety and innocence, which is quite endearing. Yeah, I think she deserves to be given more acclaim, both in terms of as a character and the performance.
I know she's dubbed, but certainly the acting and the playfulness, like on the train, doing the moustache with the hair and these little character tics and things, that she's so likable, I think.
She's incredibly likable and also, sympathetic, that the fact that she has been manipulated by, pretty much everyone, Bond and Klebb and but I think that there is, what I like about the film and her performances, there is an ambiguity in terms of how much does she actually like Bond, how much does she fancy him, how much is she doing this because she's been told to, or she sees this as a way, actually, if I just play along and say the right things, I'll be able to get out of this, I'll be able to complete the mission, I'll be able to maybe escape, him also like dangling the carrot of like, well, when you get back to England we can do this, and it's her escape plan. This is what that she wants. And I think that every time I watch it, there is a slight, I interpret it differently. I think actually maybe she is maybe is infatuated with him. Maybe she just fancies him. Maybe she actually is in love with him. Maybe she doesn't. Maybe she's just playing the game, And I love that there is that, it could either or kind of approach to that kind of performance. But yeah, there's so many. She's incredibly likable. Like the fact that she is playful, that she is, and also like, really vulnerable. She plays it so well, and again, like, I don't think really she gets enough credit for it, because she isn't the big kind of Bond girl kind of character. Like, she doesn't have that scene of coming out of the sea or having a fight with Connery in the barn. She doesn't have those moments, but what she does is have a really great character arc, and she plays it brilliantly, and again offers enough ambiguity for you to sort of potentially question her motives, or whether she's doing something for a particular reason. Brilliant performance, I think.
It's quite a tricky one when you sort of talk about, is she one of the best Bond girls, and she's not seen as one of the best. It's quite, because everyone, there's a, in the conscience, there's a, well, how good are the Bond girls, and oh, she's one of the Bond girls, they're one of the Bond girls. But generally speaking, the general public, if you were to say who's your favorite Bond girl, the general public, it's all fairly I don't know how many Bond girls they can actually name. In terms of Bond girls are there, but the role they fulfill or the memorable moments they get are less than other characters in some ways, and the names might be remembered, but I think it's still a balance that they're trying to understand how to work a Bond girl into the plot, and how integral they should be, how useful they should be, and how empowered and all that. I just don't think the general public look back on Bond girls and know them from, know them as well as other characters. They don't know them as much as henchmen. Compared to Ursula Andress, who people will remember, Tatiana's more like a clerical. She's from an office. She's dressed very conservatively and all that. She doesn't emerge from an ocean, in a bikini. And I think also audiences might get, because she is muddled all the way through. It's only at the very, very end do you finally settle on what you think she is and who you think she's there for. And that might make audiences harder for audiences to fully back her or fully invest in her. Or almost like Alison Dood, in Last Crusade, all the way through. Elsa, I like her, but I can't trust, and I don't know quite what she wants until the very end. All right, and then she's gone, kind of. So yeah, I think she's brilliant, and even though she might not have the strength as being memorable, that's not necessarily the point. Her character is essential to the plot. It's not. They're not. I don't think they were going out, thinking, what can we do to make this one of the most memorable, significant Bond girls that everyone remembers. Really, she's a crucial character. She's a crucial character, just like Kerim Bey and all these others. She's a crucial character. But it's difficult to say, how she ranks as a Bond girl, because I don't know how people remember Bond girls. I don't know if that makes any sense what I've said.
Yeah, in some ways, even someone like Caroline Munro might be more famous to people because of her image and everything.
Yeah.
I wasn't saying that she was unmemorable. It's more that she's never really mentioned in that top tier.
Yeah, yeah.
Even Electra King amongst Bond fans will rightly be in the equation. Even Natalia will be.
And it's whether you want the Bond girl you want them to fall in love. Is that what makes a good Bond girl, or is a good Bond girl one who puts pressure on Bond? And it's an interesting conversation to have. What makes a good Bond girl? What is it that people remember?
You can hear loads of our other episodes on iTunes, Spotify, and our YouTube channel, where we have interviews, special episodes, and reviews of all the Bond films. So simply search Really 007 Pod, and you should find loads of weird and wonderful content.
Remember, you're only president for life.
When we did our Best Allies thing, we do a poll on Twitter and everything. Karim Bey won that quite easily. Goldfinger is the one, often people say, that really moulded everything together. But goodness me, there's such progression from Dr. No to From Russia with Love with the building blocks of Bond. And yes, Quarrel's a great character, but Kerim Bey, it's just that's what we want in a Bond film, isn't it? A charming ally. He almost makes Bond look like a fairly normal guy, an unremarkable person, because this guy is so like Columbo, these characters that make Bond look like a bit more normal and lovely, perhaps, than he actually is.
He's absolutely superb. I mean, Quarrel's a brilliant ally in Dr. No. What they both do is they're people who are local to the place that Bond is kind of, inhabiting briefly, and he's coming into a different world. But really, with Karim Bey, he opens up this whole other world that's going on, and he fleshes it out, and he knows all the key players. Bond doesn't know all, who Krylenko or whoever is, but there are all these people, these mysterious figures that Karim Bey is aware of, and he's operating and almost, trying to run something in this world that clearly exists outside of Bond. Bond is just dropped into it. And again, I think that's something that we've discussed, that it would be nice to have a bit more of that in Bond these days, rather than things sort of revolving around him so much. And yeah, Karim Bey, he's so relaxed, he's so charming. He is charming, and he oozes charisma. Yeah, in a way that almost Bond isn't quite up to his level in terms of, when Karim Bey walks into a room, people will notice him and feel something. Perhaps he is more immediately likable than Bond. When we get to that train scene and he is found dead, that's quite shocking, and that's something that has stayed with me. And I remember that as a kid, and I found it quite scary. And perhaps the fact that you don't see it makes it a bit scarier somehow. And the way that it's reported, and everything is reported to Bond, and he comes in and he finds them both, and they must have killed each other. And yeah, I think that is quite scary. And that being Grant who's done it, again, it's another thing which adds to this, to Bond and Grant having to come face to face. And yeah, so in terms of Karim Bey, wonderful character, wonderful performance, especially when he was really suffering physically at the time. And he's left an incredible legacy on, in the Bond franchise. And again, if Grant is the henchman or the physical villain that every other villain has to, try and reach those heights, Karim Bey is the ally who every other, male ally has to try and emulate.
Okay, so obviously throughout the series, we've got Felix Leiter, and of course, he always receives the spotlight or the credit and the acclaim as being Bond's greatest ally, which I'm not going to dispute. But in terms of one-off appearances and allies, yeah, Kerim is definitely up there for me. Very much with Draco as well. Yeah. That's those two actually. I share similar sentiments towards them. I think the dynamic between Kerim and Bond, though, it's a beautiful watch, and from the second they meet each other, you can tell that Kerim is a well-versed, well-travelled, well-educated man. This here is an old friend of mine, and it tells me something smells. From that little throwaway comment, you just know that everything about Kerim is worldly and well-versed, and we know nothing about him, but yet we know everything about him in that split second, and just his progression throughout the film. It's lovely. It's lovely to watch, actually. And there's that scene when at the gypsy camp when the belly dancer is sort of flirting with Bond, and just that little smile he gives,
Yeah.
as Bond is almost being seduced, I think is lovely. And yeah, especially when we get to the train sequence as well. I think what makes you feel his death more than anything from a plot perspective is obviously when you compare his character with the actor's story. I mean, obviously, as we all know, he was very ill by that point, and he was effectively dying as that film was being made and being shot. And I think it adds a extra layer to it, really. When we lose Kerim, we have lost Pedro as well, and it hits harder, I would say. But I've always loved Pedro in that role. I always thought he was fantastic, and again, he doesn't quite get the credit he deserves. Obviously, the diehard Bond fans will recognize the performance and the texture and layers to that character. But again, when you think of allies to Bond, everyone outside of the community seems to think, always will naturally go to Felix Leiter. But no, he was a cracking character, and it's just a shame we couldn't get him back for another. Real shame.
Maybe they would have done, because I'm sure audiences would love this performance. It's so at odds with the actor's health that he's so full of life in the film. The performance is so full of life. He's effectively M's equivalent. And it's quite nice to see, well, this guy's totally different to M. Bond's relationship with M is quite, goodness me, total authority, not much humour, trust, of course. But with Karim Bey, he's away from home, so to speak. This guy's a bit of a laddo. I can have fun with him, and he's like encouraging the behaviour at the gypsy camp. Very good set piece, in fact. I know it was at Pinewood, but that brings out the best in Karim Bey as well.
Yeah, I think, like you're saying before, like that he is pretty much the ultimate kind of ally in terms of the way that he's set up. That he is this larger than life character, that has genuine or extended family network of people who work with him. Bit of a sleaze, which obviously comes down quite well, and that's what makes his death have more of an impact, is the fact that he is incredibly likable, that he is connected, and that scene where Bond hands over I think the wallet and the cigarette filter to one of his sons.
Yeah,
inverted commas. It sort of adds to it's the John Glenn world of setting up really likable characters and then killing them off for the impact. But yeah, I think that the gypsy camp scene is it is great, because it is kind of like, it shows that he may be Karim Bey may be kind of like this sophisticated, kind of like leader. He does like to get kind of down and dirty, and will go out into the outskirts and sit with the gypsies and enjoy their culture and enjoy that world. And I like to say that for him, the scenes, like particularly, obviously where we shoots, forgive me, I can't remember his name, but he shoots the guy in the back, and it's like, I have to pull the trigger, and again, it's like it just makes him such a kind of just a likable and well-rounded character. The fact that he shows off that he's got the periscope, that leads to the other room, and he's sort of taking him under through the bolting him underneath. He's such a brilliant character, so lovable. His death is a huge impact on the film and the plot and Bond to a certain extent. And is absolutely, you couldn't have this film without him. I think he's such a larger than life character, but also completely believable, and lovable. And like I say, I think he is the standard, like I say, like Grant sets in terms of allies or henchmen.
Because his death you don't see.
Mhm.
Compared to some of the other films, you like Saunders again, for instance. You're like, oh gosh, when you're watching it, heck, we've got that scene to come. But when I watch From Russia with Love, I almost forget that he dies. So when you do see him, it's awful. It almost has a bigger impact. Some of those early scenes with him in this sort of underground thing with that gondola, and it is
Yeah,
like we
it's
say,
the scenes they share, isn't it? It's the scenes
Yeah.
that they share that are really special. Yeah, navigating those underground tunnels on the boat, when they assassinate Kurilenko together, they collaborate on that. Kerim Bey introduces him to people, to women, to his wife, all these things. And it's that, the other thing I like in an ally is where you get the impression that they're locally known, a bit like Columbo, that they've got a reputation, they're known, and Bond gets in with them. This person that clearly has a reputation about the city or about the country has chosen to trust Bond and has chosen to let Bond in, and that creates a bit of the bond, which is the friendship that really enhances it. Yeah, they share brilliant scenes, great chemistry, their dialogue, and I think you can even see Bond, Connery, both literally and metaphorically looks up to him. And there are a few scenes where Bond does look to Kerim Bey for inspiration. He does look to Kerim Bey to wonder what he's thinking, and he takes his advice on a few things, which is brilliant. And I think, what Chris mentioned there, sort of the John Glenn thing. It's a real thing, it's such a good in a story. If you know that the ally is going to die, it's really important that you do feel something so that you can associate your feelings with how Bond's feeling. And John Glenn did it with every one of his films. But you mentioned Saunders, with the exception of Saunders and maybe Tibbet, possibly. John Glenn does seem to go along those lines that Matt talked about, where actually you don't see it.
Yeah.
It's like VJ, you don't see it. Luigi, you don't see it. Sharky, you don't see it. It's oh no, you see their body, like, oh no. But I think to have an ally is brilliant, and I suppose you can't always do it, but when an ally dies, that's the changing gear on the train. That's when momentum kicks in, and that's when you think, right, something needs to be done here. Brilliant character, and again, brilliant for the story, brilliant for the plot. He's not just a character who's thrown in for, a famous actor with a cameo that serves no real purpose. He's a character who's written for the story and who keeps the story moving, even though he's not in the full film and dies prematurely. He's still really, really important.
Hello, Really 007. It's Scott from the Spy Hards podcast sending you in a clip because I heard that you were talking about my favourite Sean Connery James Bond film, From Russia with Love. Now, I could wax poetically for the next hour about the fantastic things that film does, about how successful it is as a spy film, and that's what we look at here every week on Spy Hards. But I'll limit it down to two because I don't want to take up too much of your time. But luckily, both are quite connected. The first is the train sequence, and the train itself, the Orient Express. It has a storied history in real-life spy work. It was used to transport spies all across Europe, all around the time Ian Fleming was writing these books and before. But also a storied history in spy movies, going back to 1948, Sleeping Car to Trieste, all the way through to most recently with Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1. The final act of that film takes place on the Orient Express, so people are still using it for spy work apparently. But the main thing I wanted to shout out, the main bit of love I wanted to throw at From Russia with Love is Robert Shaw's Red Grant. It's a really bold thing they did. In the second film as well, you've got to think about it, it's the second Bond film to say there is someone out there that is as formidable as James Bond, and that is Red Grant. And on a different day, Red Grant would have won that fight in that cabin. And, it's something they've gone and tried to copy since, going all the way up to Spectre most recently. You tried to have that sort of Hinks and Bond fight on the train. Not quite as successful, I would say, but I appreciate the attempt nonetheless. But, Red Grant himself is such a formidable foe all the way back from the start. When Rosa Klebb is punching him in the stomach, you know he's not someone to be messed with. And then I love Bond doing some spy work and detecting in some tradecraft there, trying to figure out what's going on. He's picking up on the clues on the train, you know, the wine, his terminology to Bond, and then eventually figures out the case, and they have that fantastic fight sequence in the cabin in the train. And I think it's something that Bond films have tried to emulate again since I mentioned the Hinks fight, but it's come up quite a few times. And I think it's something that will never really be duplicated or simulated successfully. I think it's a very tense and gritty and visceral fight, and you can feel the piss and vinegar in that fight. They both want to physically destroy one another. And it's only, you know, finally and wonderfully, Bond wins, and, you know, we get to have the rest of the film and subsequently another 25 films after that. But yeah, I just wanted to shout out my love for both The Train and Red Grant. I adore this film. I'm glad you guys are celebrating it. And until next time, I'll see you around.
Well, another important ally, not in terms of screen time, but the beginning of an era, is Desmond Llewelyn as Q. I don't have a proper, more fleshed out guy. Even though I don't know whether it was intended that he would be in every film at this stage. Because there's even a shot of, you just see him waiting in the background, don't you? Like when Bond comes through Moneypenny's office into M's office, he's like that. He's not that significant at this stage. But of course, it's the gadgets that are introduced. You can argue this is the best gadget, partly because it's all-encompassing.
Well, it's a very nasty Christmas present, isn't it? So I think that it's like almost worth the wait. You know, obviously, Doctor No, you don't, you know, he does have equipment, so to speak. But I think that it is, you know, From Russia with Love, to be given this, this sort of boys' adventure kit of, you know, about, you know, this attaché case. It's got, you know, the gold, and it's got a dagger in it. It's got, you know, and you have to turn the, you know, the buttons. It's just absolutely, you can't ask for anything better. And also to see it play out, it also doesn't feel forced. You know, it doesn't. There aren't moments just like, oh, this is clearly this is the moment when he's going to use that gadget. Which later on in the series there are, you know, to be fair, there are moments where it is like that. But for him to have such a classy gadget, an attaché briefcase, is just, you know, like the pinnacle. It comes in handy, you know, like obviously like the sniper's rifle. Of course he would need a sniper's rifle. He's a spy, you know, he's an assassin, you know, he's all those things. And it, you know, he gets to use it a couple of times. The introduction of the character, again, no nonsense, just which is Q's just approach, isn't it? It's like, here you are, and this is that, and that, you know, like, okay, show me, you know, like even the fact they take the time to get Bond to actually, you know, if you turn it this way, it's like, show me how to do it. Like he doesn't trust it. Like you know, you turn him this way, you know, and it click, and even the sound effect, boom, you know, and it opening it up, and you know, put the talcum powder, you know, kind of here and that. Absolutely love it. He's such a brilliant, and again, like, it's such a great introduction to a character, because like I say, it's no nonsense, and he ends up becoming, you know, obviously we see in the next film where the fact that Bond rolls his eyes is like, oh, you know, and then it's like, oh, not you again, you know, there's this like, oh, you know, he's such a pain having to deal with Q, which is a brilliant, kind of builds up that kind of that, you know, that relationship, which obviously the pinnacle being License to Kill is just brilliantly put together. But yeah, I think he's you can't have the series without him. I think that obviously, as there is, you know, the gadgets become more and more important, and you know, in the films, the gadgets, the cars, you know, the vehicles and stuff. You can't. There's no one else who can introduce it. There's no one else who can say, who's been there to say this is how this works, and you know, here's the instruction manual, and it's like this thick, and it's, you know, all that. I absolutely love it. What a brilliant character, and played. You know, he is part of the furniture, isn't he? You know, he is just a brilliant character, and you know, and Desmond played it. You couldn't ask it. I don't think anyone. It's difficult because he's just, you know, you think of Q, and obviously we've had actors who've played, you know, it and brought different things to it, but Desmond Llewelyn is Q, and that's the end of it for me.
I think I'm right. He's in more Bond films than anyone else in terms of the character. And you wouldn't have known that based on the books, because he's fairly insignificant. This is where cinema Bond takes it up a level, particularly in Goldfinger in the next film.
I mean, obviously, as we all know, Bond fans will be aware that he's not the first actor to portray Q. The first was Richard Burton's brother. When he was introduced as Major Boothroyd, but in this one, he's not referred to as Major Boothroyd or to Q. M just simply mentions, Q Branch has been putting this smart piece of luggage together for us. And what I like about that scene is the fact that M makes it very clear we are issuing this to all 00 personnel, not just to Bond, which of course then comes into its own later on the train when he has to rely on the other attaché case that's going. Like you say, it's the archetypal piece of gadgetry, a wonderful, nasty little Christmas present. It's what every boy would want under the Christmas tree, isn't it? Really, and what I love about that whole piece of equipment as a gadget is no item goes to waste. He utilizes absolutely everything, and I don't know if anyone else feels the same way. But when he's opening, as Chris says, he doesn't quite trust Bond with this, and when Bond is opening it, there's almost a sense of trepidation when it's like, my heart's in my mouth somewhat. Yeah. Please work. But what can you say about Desmond? I mean, he is the archetypal Q. As wonderful and as much as I love Ben Whishaw as an actor, Q is Desmond, and Desmond is Q. Always has been, always will be, and quite rightly said, the actor who's been in more Bond films than anybody else. And that's just testament, I think, not just to the character, but to who Desmond was as a man. I mean, I never met him myself, but from people who have, he was just as lovely off screen as he appears on screen. Because early on, he's quite frosty, especially with Bond, but then he warms to Bond. And I think that's lovely. And especially in License to Kill, I mean, that's just the dynamic between the two, is really superb. It's a wonderful scene to watch, all the scenes that they're in, actually. But just don't use the flash.
Thought you might get that.
We watched Goldfinger together recently, and as kind of been said, that establishes that relation, the dynamic between the two of them. This is, pretty key to have a gadget such as this, so iconic, that is absolutely key to Bond saving his own life and being able to complete the mission, being given to him in M's office in a very crisp scene there, and to have Desmond Llewellyn's Q is just, it's so, again, perhaps not to the same level as some of the other key elements that we often talk about that needed to come together, but he's had such a significant impact on the franchise. Incredibly well known outside of Bond fans. It's not just Bond fans who know of Q and gadgets, and in fact, often these similar films or TV shows or whatever almost have a Q character, and when people are reviewing it or talking about it, will often refer to that character as like a Q type character. And I don't think we can underestimate the impact of Desmond Llewelyn on that, because it's only because he's so likable, and like I say, that they were able to develop that dynamic, but he has great chemistry with all the Bond actors that he's with, which is something you can't buy. That's not, you can't force it has to happen, and obviously so much of that comes from Desmond Llewelyn. So this is the start, quite a low-key start for him, but of something really special.
The thing that audiences grew to love with Q is, it's two things, isn't it? It's the gadget and his relationship with Bond. The strength of this introduction to Desmond Llewelyn is that he introduces a really amazing gadget. That helps, so that when Goldfinger comes along and you see Desmond Llewelyn, you think, what's the next cool thing? So Desmond Llewelyn is helped by this brilliant gadget. That's helped introduce him significantly. But at the same time, it's such a good decision for the franchise. In Q Branch, or whenever he's given the gadget, even if it's in M's office, even though a little bit of the emphasis is on Q demonstrating how the gadget works, which is a little bit, oh, wow, a wow moment, which is great. Such a good decision, this idea that the actual chemistry between the characters is like Kieran's talked about, that idea of Q handing a gadget over to Bond. So many of the Q scenes are funny because it's that Q, trusting Bond with these gadgets or not being able to quite trust, like whatever the gadget is, even throughout the films, it's that it's not necessarily about the intricacies of the gadget, but it's Q's, nervous when Bond comes in, which is such a funny dynamic. I think it makes you realize that gadgets don't always need to be big and electric, but they need to. It's the fact that they're concealed, and it's the way their gadgets are hidden from sight and hidden from the enemy. That's what makes them impressive.
Because you're building these relationships, aren't you? Not just with Q, but Moneypenny and M.
Yeah.
He might have thought, well, it might not be the same boss for this film. You wouldn't have thought necessarily that his M secretary would be in the film, would you? These are just building blocks, and because of the success of the relationship with Lois Maxwell in the first film, I mean, the audience would be like, silly not to want more of that. And we actually get that great interaction where there's that insight into M in Japan, that sort of where Moneypenny's finding that quite interesting. She wants to hear more. And that builds not only a relationship between Bond and Moneypenny, but M and Moneypenny as well. So it's great to have both of them back. And
it's building those characters, building the relationships, building the dynamics. There is that. Again, it is this one where it's talked about, well, there was that night in Tokyo, or that gets mentioned, doesn't it? Which is quite strange and almost seemingly not out of place, but just seems to be a little bit weird. But it's crucial that these things were in place and that these people were cast. Again, when looking forward in the franchise, they've always been spot on with the casting of lots of these parts. It's, or maybe all of them, but I don't know how well known Bernard Lee was at the time. I'm sure he'd been in loads of films, and I know he's in The Third Man and everything, but we don't have to go for someone at quite the same level as Ralph Fiennes. You can have a good television actor like Judi Dench was, Shakespearean actor as well. I know that, but and then they can make the role their own. They're so fundamental to the series, and having had Dr. No to now build on those things in this film is crucial.
Bernard Lee, like Sean Connery and Lois Maxwell as well, they are the archetypal portrayals of those characters. I mean, Samantha Bond was brilliant in her own right. Even Caroline Bliss, I like her portrayal of Moneypenny. She's very playful, and that's really quite endearing. But Lois will always be Moneypenny. When you think of Moneypenny, who do you think of? And that's, for me, how you establish who the definitive actor who's portrayed that part essentially is. And I will always think of Bernard Lee, as much as I love Robert Brown and, of course, Judi Dench. And again, I think the testament to this franchise, the longevity, is the champagne casting that was not just Connery and the Bond girls and the villains, but the supporting cast as well. That there's an old saying in the biz, there's no small parts, only small actors. And if you compare, obviously, Connery's screen time to that of Bernard Lee's, one massively outweighs the other, but they are just as integral as each other. And for me, like I say, that was absolutely critical. And I don't think the films would probably be what they are today if that supporting cast hadn't have been as strong.
There's something missing today with the casting, is that we don't cast character actors anymore. We just cast names. And I think that it is great to have, that Matt said, like to have a Ralph Fiennes or a Judi Dench, but I want the right actor for that role. I want someone to be memorable and for them to sort of create something. I think it's, like those jobbing actors that you had during the 60s and 70s. No, it's it's completely different now. But it was such a wide pool of working class actors, who could bring something to these roles. And I think it's it is a little bit sad that you go for the names now for those roles as opposed to going, well, he's got an interesting face, and I reckon he would be a good fit for that role, or she's got something about her. But we do fall back into, well, she was in that last film that was quite successful, so let's get her in it. But yeah, Bernard Lee is just absolutely amazing. You know, he's just I love just how grumpy he is, but how he is also, there's a genuine admiration, and I feel like maybe love for Bond. There is a bond there, that there is something that they've been through together, and I love those little throwaway moments of backing here and there, and this is, oh, let's turn that off, Moneypenny. I love the fact that off screen Bond has been through something with M, and that's all we need to know. We don't need a flashback. We don't need something scripted. It's just a line, and that it just fleshes it out. And his embarrassment, his the fact that he is put on the spot says so much. You don't need. That's all it is. That you know exactly what went on there. But I think that Bernard Lee and Lois Maxwell, just they are, again, like you can't. They're the greatest, so such an impact that they had, and I think that like I say, that as much as other actors have played those parts and they are really kind of memorable, and I love them for that. They are the original, almost like going back to you can argue who's the best Bond, who's your favorite Bond. Well, Connery was the original, so he'll always be a special place in your heart, kind of thing. Moving forward, I would love to see more kind of interesting casting for those roles.
So, but you're not saying that Judi Dench and Ray Fiennes are wildly miscast?
I'm saying that they're terrible. I think they're awful in those roles. No, of course not. I just think that they're and I love that the fact that like seeing Judi Dench in GoldenEye was like, this is brilliant. This was like the shot in the arm. This was added, was perfect casting for that time. The speech that she gives Bond is absolutely brilliant for that time. I think I have no problem casting a woman as M in the future. It just has to be someone who is interesting, and is obviously now with that Bond character, that Bond actor, no, that Bond that Bond actor hasn't died. That character has died with that Bond actor. It's a clean sheet, isn't it? Basically. So you can't bring, as much as I'd love to see Judi Dench do more, we can't have that, or we can't have Ray Fiennes do that anymore because of the circumstances of that character. But yeah, they brought every one of them brought something interesting to it. It's just that I'd just like to see, let's move away from just getting a name for the sake of it. Let's have some more interesting characters.
Join us for part 4 of our From Russia with Love 60th anniversary special.